Hey, good morning, good morning, everyone. I am here live with Prince Principe. I'm Grant McGaw, if you did not know. We're going to have candid conversations every week about the financial world and some of the different, aspects, perceptions, things that are top of mind right now in the financial IT world. Now, Chris has been doing a publication. A lot of people don't know this for a very, very long time. So he's on top of the pulse of a lot of these things that you see on his name, publisher, financial IT. I'm going to have him first define what that is. And then we're going to have a conversation around financial branding today, because, branding is my thing. So we're kind of going to combine our two worlds and see if we can have a really good conversation. So, Chris, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey, Grant, thank you so much. I thought that introduction was pretty good there that you handed over to me. But yes, my name is Chris Principe. I'm the publisher of Financial IT. We've been hitting the fintech world since 2012. And we like to think of ourselves as the financial IT as the voice of fintech to the banks, corporations, and governments. So we're your voice.
Oh, I love that. Your voice. You see, so you already branded it right there. People are like, well, what is financial branding? What are we talking about here? And if you really step back and think about it, it's pretty simple. It's the perception that you have about different banking institutions. Why do you bank where you bank? Is there a perception of having your money, let's say, in an offshore bank or an inshore bank? Or you look in your local world, is my money better off in a big box, well-known brand like Wells Fargo or Chase Bank, or maybe a smaller world that is not as savvy? Maybe it's a savings and loan or credit union or things like that. And I think a lot of times, I think there's like, what are you using your money for? What is the purpose behind it? If you're just kind of stashing it away, maybe it's not as big of a deal as that. But if you're looking from an investor perspective, capital access perspective, and as people start to do due diligence in the investment banking world, they want to see kind of how you are banked and how your bank creates, whether we like it or not, creates a perception in the mind in the observer. So first, let's test that theory out. Chris, has what I said resonated with you? Is that good, bad, or indifferent?
Grant, as usual, you come up with the heart of the matter there, really. What we're talking about is, what is the names? Where do they come from? What does it mean to you? And I'll say, in a lot of cases, I think a lot of us grew up that, well, if grandpa and if dad did this, like they bought Fords all the time, we bought Fords, right? If they banked at Citibank, well, we banked at Citibank. Even as things as your family doctor, these kind of things in the past, I think, were very relevant to what always happened inside your family. And I think today there's really been a big change in that. And I'll give you just an example with our publication, Financial IT. Right when we started in 2012, the use of the term fintech really didn't exist.
Hmm.
And if it did, we would probably be called something like FinTech Magazine. So it's kind of interesting. There's also the timing that's involved with these things, right? Now, if we focus a little bit on the financial world, because a lot of banks have been around for a long time, right, and have been built and grew through acquisition, we get a multitude of combined names, for instance. And I want to ask you, is that really to help the brand? Is that to keep that identity of trust? Because the main thing for financial institutions really is trust. So we combine names so that people can still feel the trust of the organization. So I'm kind of interested in why banks get the kind of names they have.
What you said is the most important thing. Legacy, a lot of times. If your family has been banked in a particular institution for a couple of generations, the likelihood of you staying with them is pretty high. So think of the entrance of Wells Fargo, and I remember this. I remember when I was, first moved to Miami. Let's say I was down in Miami, and the bank actually, the name of the bank changed 3 times. I don't even remember the name of the. Now it's been so long now. I think it was called a Bank Card or something like that. I can't even remember. However, it became a Wells Fargo for the most part. No, actually, I take that back. It became a Bank of America. Bank of America came into the market and started buying these banks. And that actual bank, when I first opened my account, this was back in 1998, it had a certain name. And then about 2000, it got absorbed by another bank. And then about 2002 or so, it just became a Bank of America, and you were just kind of used to it. Now, for me, coming in from the outside, it didn't matter because I was new to the situation. The name had no emotional connection, to it. So it didn't matter. But however, think about it. If your business was banked there and you had all your bank books, your bank notes, everything was tied to that particular naming mechanism, and maybe it wasn't even in your back office software applications. The name change is really a big deal because not only you change, but now I have to change. I got to go with that. So sometimes that becomes a bit of a problem. Now, when it comes to business brand, let's just say, sometimes that can be a good thing. Like, hey, I'm now banked at Bank of America. That's a big box, right? So then I put that on my information, or when I'm looking to do certain things from a business perspective, like, where are you bank? I'm banked at Bank of America. Sometimes that could be a good thing. So what I'm saying, it's very individualized when it comes to financial branding and purpose and what does that all mean. As we know now, you can do certain things from a traditional aspect, and then other things, because the world keeps changing, you need to be more cutting edge or on the pulse, or seen as innovative, right? I know when I did my taxes this year, it kept coming up. Do you have cryptocurrencies? Have you traded in cryptocurrencies? If you do, it's going to change the thing. Now, 5 years ago or so, that maybe not, but now, yeah, there's a great percentage of people that are in this new fintech world. So there's a perception, there's a brand around that, there's a newness around that. Then you start thinking about, well, is my tax accounting really aware of how this crypto world works, or not? you know so there's a lot to this moving mechanism than just a name, right? People think it's just a name, just a logo. There's a lot more to that, right?
So Grant, I mean, you hit upon a bunch of things, and yeah, I like that crypto topic, right? So, but well, I want to go back to one of the things you said in the beginning, which is legacy brand, right? So if we look at the 4 biggest banks in America today, and those 4 banks have more assets than all the other U.S. banks combined. That's how big the big 4 are, right? We can look at those 4 names, and 3 out of the 4 are really legacy names, right? So Bank of America, well, this is America, right? So it's the perfect brand, let's say. Who wouldn't trust Bank of America if you're a true American, right? Then you get Wells Fargo. And look, Wells Fargo company's been around since the Cowboys and Indians time, or maybe before. And it's originally was a company that was a messenger service that got into moving financially and started connecting the West to the East. And so that name resonates, and it's stuck for a long time. Then you come to the third one, Citibank. Well, started in New York City. Especially back in the day, that was the city. I mean, there wasn't anything like it. So that brand stuck. Now we come to the last one, and the last one is J.P. Morgan Chase. So it's a combination now of some real wealth known, I should say.
Yes.
Right? J.P. Morgan, one of the richest men in the world in his times. Chase, it's a name that's been out there for well, really, since just after the revolution is where that name came from. So they've combined them to keep, I guess, that that legacy trust that people have in those names and those brands. So that's the big four, and it's interesting how that continues. And I think we want to move on to a break now, and I want to come back, and I want to hit you with some of the next brand names and your thoughts on them.
I'm looking forward to that. All right, we'll break for a minute. We'll come right back.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. Stock futures were moving lower this morning. President Donald Trump's latest round of tariffs is now in place. Trump's latest tariffs pushed those imposed on China this year to as high as 104%. And now China has raised tariffs on U.S. goods to 84%. Oil today sank to a fresh 4-year low on demand concerns. It was well below $60 a barrel this morning. Another major loss for Wall Street yesterday that started with promise. Stocks jumped higher at the opening bell, but after another volatile session, punctuated by tariff remarks from the White House, the Dow finished down 320 points, the S&P 500 fell 79, the Nasdaq slid 335 points. Former Treasury Secretary Lawrence Summers warned that the U.S. is now likely headed toward a recession, with potentially 2 million Americans put out of work thanks to tariff increases. Summers spoke with Wall Street Week, predicting losses in household income of $5,000 per family or more. Gina Cervetti, Bloomberg.
Welcome to Follow the Brand, where we turn leaders into legends. I'm Grant McGaw, CEO of 5-Star BDM. Today, we're not just talking about executive presence, we're going to transform yours. Executive presence isn't about power, it's about trust. And here's the good news. You can build it at any level. Let's dive into how you can command any room you enter. Dr. Kimberly Long, CEO of California Nurse Leaders, shared a profound insight. The moment you try to prove your power is the moment you lose it. Executive presence is about building trust and authority without force. It's about creating an environment where people lean in to listen. You can achieve this by being authentic and consistent in your communication and actions. Consider Dr. Long during a hospital merger. She lowered her voice instead of raising it, and the room leaned in. Similarly, Sarah Chen, a project manager, used this technique in meetings. Within 3 months, her team began to emulate her style. Denzel Ross, now president of IU Health South Central, built his presence by identifying communication gaps and lifting others up. These examples show how presence spreads through subtle yet powerful actions. Your action step. In your next 3 meetings, try speaking 10% slower and 20% quieter. Watch what happens. For team leads, start delegating key responsibilities. Managers should use meetings as learning labs. Directors build cross-functional bridges. The key shift? Stop being the answer person. Start being the question person. This approach fosters growth and empowers others. Patrick Green, CEO of UF Health Jacksonville, uses a communication matrix to simplify complex ideas. His 3-step formula: start with impact, follow with insight, end with action. For example, instead of saying, "We need to upgrade our systems," he says, "We can save 50 lives this year by investing in this technology. Here's how." This clarity builds influence and trust. 3 common mistakes: reactivity, over-explaining, and imposter syndrome. When challenged, take a slow sip of water to respond thoughtfully. Instead of defending every detail, offer a headline first. Dr. Long still gets nervous before board meetings but prepares thoroughly. Remember, nervousness is energy. Executive presence isn't a destination, it's a practice. Start where you are, use what you have, and build from there.
When you deliver on your promise, and you have the result you were looking for, and everybody in the room is like, wow, this is what we're talking about. Hey, we are back. We are back. And Chris, you left us on a cliffhanger out there, right? You're about to ask me some pretty important stuff. So we want to continue along that line of thought. So tell me what's on your mind.
Well, at the end there, we just talked about the four biggest banks in the world, the big four, big in the U.S., I should say. Okay, they're also in the top 10, top 20 of the world. But so their names are interesting and they're well known. But for me, it's more interesting to look at some of the next level banks and get some of your thoughts on how these things came up, right? So I look in just in the top 10. So we have PNC Bank, right? So Pittsburgh National Corp. It's based on where they are, right? Now I come to another one, Truist, right? Now Truist is a new name bank, and it's the result of a bank that was called BB&T, Business Bank and Trust, right, which was out of North Carolina, who merged with SunTrust, which,
Yes.
by the way, I thought was a great brand name, right, out of Atlanta, right? And they merged and they became Truist. And I guess there was multi-million dollars spent on coming up with the brand of Truist. What would be your thoughts on something like that?
That's a great question because you just jarred my memories. Like SunTrust, I remember going down Doral Boulevard in Miami. You see a SunTrust. SunTrust was kind of everywhere, and I think somewhere along the line, I forgot that Truist was the outcropping act because there was a merger. There was a lot of acquisitions and mergers, M&A work in the banking industry. And from my perspective, working with Cornerstone Capital and investment banking, M&A happens a lot in our country. And sometimes we forget, where these origins of names and businesses actually came from. Because it's not the same as you just mentioned, JP Morgan Chase. Well, they were two separate entities, for a long time, and they kind of came together as JP Morgan Chase. And matter of fact, that's one of the institutions I work with, and you'll still see there's some separation when you work with the bank. Oh, you went wealth management, or you working with the JP Morgan people. Oh, you just went standard banking, checking, saving, credit card kind of stuff. That's the Chase side of the business. You don't think about that JP Morgan Chase, but that's the way it is. So I think and I'm going to just say this, when it comes to not just in the banking world, the finance world itself, I think they do a poor job of branding. I think they actually they suck at it. They really do, because they forget the consumer in the process of what they're doing. There's no why behind it. Like, well, why did you go through this merger acquisitions with let's say SunTrust and then BB&T and then Truist? Well, what's the reason? Do you not have any money? Is that the problem? Are you are you losing market share? Should I be concerned about where you stand? From a banking perspective, how your bank, is the FDIC kind of pulling your coat? Sometimes we talked about what happened to Bankman and his world with FTX, but he was working with a traditional bank that a lot of investors work with out of the Silicon Valley, California world. A lot of people don't know these things. Then you have like organizations like BlackRock. You hear these names, but you know how they're put together, how all those collaborations, how all this money is actually working through. So I say to say this: the average person really doesn't understand what these banks are doing, and their name doesn't really lend to you understanding what that is. And so if Wells Fargo, like today, got bought up by Bank of America, most people will be like, all right, it's just two people coming, but you have no understanding because there's no reasoning. They don't really take the time to explain to you what it is that we're doing that's going to be better for you. See, branding is about that. It's explaining, it explains of itself the benefit of what the business is about, what the business does, right? You understand that. Like when you see the golden arches, so to speak, right? The golden, and when I say that, I didn't say the name, I said the golden arches. That's a brand. You automatically know that in your mind, you see the big McDonald's, the big M, the golden arches. It's prevalent. And let me tell you this, when you go into any McDonald's, you have an expectation of experience because there's a consistency no matter where you are in the world that you're going to get exactly what you pay for, no matter if you're in the United States, you're in the Caribbean, you're somewhere else, you get a very consistent experience, right? So if one day McDonald's got bought by Wendy's, just for instance, you'd be concerned about, well, what's my consistency of experience now? You hear this all the time when you hear about, companies and businesses. They get someone that says, like me and you, we're older now. They're not like they used to be. When they were by themselves, they were just, you just knew. But now you don't know. No, who knows? The young people, they don't understand these things. So that perception changes. The consistency of experience changes. And what we talked about even last week, if you're that millennial or even that Gen Z world, Gen X world, you know what? 20 to 30, the traditional banking system it's not sexy to you. Like, if you don't have, a crypto teller sitting there and I can't exchange, certain goods and services using, that kind of banking system or because, I can exchange money in lightning speed now without even driving to a location. The banking experience has changed. Does the name really resonate with excellence? Does it resonate with wealth of itself, with the surety, right? Especially in today's world where there's always talk of recession and this and that. You're like, well, where's my money safe, right? You want to make sure that you go check your account that it's good, So follow me on those lines of thinking. What are your thoughts?
Well, Grant, I mean, I love some of the stuff that you just talked about. And, in my imagination, to hear the idea of Wells Fargo and Bank of America merging, I mean, first, the U.S. government probably wouldn't allow it because they would just be way too big. But what a fight internally on, are we going to be Wells Fargo or are we going to be Bank of America? Same thing when you mentioned McDonald's and Wendy's. Right away, I'm thinking, I'm not thinking so much about the experience, which is actually the real point of it. I'm thinking about who would win that fight, McDonald's or Wendy's, whose brand is going to draw out. Now, I want to throw you another one out of the top 10 banks, right?
Yeah.
And it's a bank that I know very well, and you've probably heard of it. The name is Fifth Third Bank.
Oh, Fifth Third. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So the origins of Fifth Third Bank, believe it or not, was the merger between Third Bank and Fifth Bank, right?
No way. Is that right?
No, it's really true. That really is true. But here's the thing is, I'm in a market, right? And there's different banks there. And there's Fifth Bank, right? I mean, would I want to bank with Fifth Bank or would I want to bank with First Bank? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So then I think to myself, the next step, well, do I want to bank with First Bank or Third Bank, right? So then I look at it and I say, well, the merger between Fifth Bank and Third Bank became Fifth Third Bank. I don't know. Does it inspire confidence? But it's a top 10 U.S. bank now. What's some of your thoughts on how that happens?
Well, what you're getting at is specialty. What's what I call specialty. Why do you go to a certain law firm? Why do you go to a certain tax accountant? Because they have specialties. You should know what your bank's specialty is. Like in the healthcare world, you go to a certain hospital because that is what they're known for. They're known for cancer treatment. They're known for diabetes. They're known for orthopedics. You know this. This is their brand. They are known for this, right? In the banking world, I think that's been lost a little bit in the branding world because that's just a name. What does First Bank mean? What does it call up for you? What does it say that you're about? I'm not really sure, to be honest. I mean, you get anybody that has a bank account, got a bank account, got a checking account, got a savings account, you got a credit card. Okay. What is your specialty? what are you doing in the back end? Now, banks do a lot more, and Chris, you know this, than what your average consumer realizes what they're doing. And they are in their industry, they are known for that type of thing. Maybe you're known for real estate transactions, you know, and then what you do. Maybe you're known for like Capital One. It's a bank, but you're known for credit card transaction. That's what you're really known, but they do a lot more than that, right? So you've got to do some due diligence on your own to see, well, what is this bank really about? I'm now in Omaha, Nebraska, as we speak, my hometown. We go up this street here, right? It's called Dodge Street. It's one of the major streets, right? There's a bank like almost on every corner. You know, and if you don't know, like, well, yeah, there's a JP Morgan, JP Morgan, there's a Bank of America, there's a Citibank, there's a First National Bank, there's some we call traditional Omaha banks, there's bigger banks, there's just credit unions. You need to do your due diligence to understand what that banking system does. Now, I'll flip it back to the business of banking itself. I think they need to do better. They need to do better. If you just don't like, was it third, fifth, one of those two? No. Well, what does that mean? At one point in time, it meant something because of what they did and what they stood for and the geography that they served. And everyone that banked probably at that time knew what Fifth was all about. Oh, yeah. And it could have been like in New York City. Everybody knows Fifth Street. So you represented that street. But if you're not in New York City, it doesn't mean that much to you, right? You don't know the history. I think banking, you live and breathe in this world. So you understand from a brand perspective, I'm telling you that I don't think people know what these banks really do. I don't think their name, it's not so much the name, it's this, like I said, the perception of what that bank is about is lost. When I said the Golden Arches, you knew immediately what I was talking about. Now, if I started to say something like, yeah, the big American bank, you might get a perception of Bank of America. If I start saying, yeah, the bank that has the horse and buggy behind, you might get a perception of Wells Fargo, right? But I don't think it's not as stark as it should be because, as we said even before, and before I let you answer, we're going to go to break because I think this goes back to what we talked about even before, even 2-3 weeks ago. Fellas, people, we are on a monopoly board. You need to understand what the bank is doing, right? You need to understand what the bank is doing. And I see Chris is like, he's ready to jump in here. So we're going to go to a short break. We're going to bring Chris back. And I'm going to say it again, because that's how the game starts. The bank doles out the money. The bank, where you pass go, this is who pays everything out. The bank is the central system. And if we don't understand what this bank is doing, we're doing a disservice. We need to peel this back and know what not only that top tier banking system you just talked about, the big four, but the big 20 of these banks, and knowing the difference between a savings and loan. Remember that? Remember the savings and loan crash some time ago? And what these banks are doing and how they operate, especially when I think we're going into a new financial model worldwide. So we need to understand these things. So we're going to go to a break, and then we'll be back. Thank you.
5-Star BDM, Brand Development Masters, is a professional consulting and advisory group keenly focused on business development services for the small to mid-sized business and entrepreneurs. Although every business is unique, they often share business development challenges that can be addressed through smart branding. Services include process improvement and operations, digital strategy and transformation, business intelligence, digital marketing, and personal branding. Our business and personal branding company has helped a number of professionals and organizations to optimize and grow. This results in more business, more opportunities, better reach, positive outcomes. Visit www.5starbdm.com today to learn more.
In today's fast-paced financial landscape, access to capital is the key to success. At the heart of this revolution is Case Capital Markets, powered by SETI Case. Here, innovation and investment converge, creating a dynamic environment where businesses can thrive and reach new heights. Introducing Grant McGaw, the Senior Advisor at Case Capital Markets. Grant is a visionary leader, dedicated to connecting businesses with institutional capital and strategic funding. His expertise opens doors to game-changing investment opportunities, making him an invaluable partner for companies looking to scale and succeed in the competitive world of finance. With an impressive 25 years in technology, 9 years in healthcare, and 6 years in investment banking, Grant McGaw has a proven track record. He has successfully closed over $500 million in high-value transactions, seamlessly bridging technology, healthcare, and infrastructure with innovative financial solutions. His experience is a testament to his ability to drive success. Case Capital Markets offers businesses direct access to over 32,000 venture capital firms, private equity funds, family offices, and institutional investors. This network empowers mid-market companies with under $100 million in revenue to scale beyond their limits, unlocking unprecedented growth potential. Debt, equity, growth capital, public offerings. These are the building blocks of the future of capital access. Whether you're scaling a business, seeking investment, or exploring market expansion, Grant McGaw is your trusted partner. Together, you can unlock capital and create long-term financial success. The future belongs to those who take action. Are you ready to elevate your business?
Hey, we are back. We are back. We're talking about the McDonald's of the banking world, like Bank of America. Chris had a great question he wants to get off his chest. So, Chris, bring it to us.
What I would just want to pick up a little bit where you left off and say, yeah, in banking today, there's no longer that clear delineation, that clear connection to what they actually do. And today, really, banks, and a lot of it is because of years ago deregulation, banks, can do everything. We see banks that are in life insurance, for instance, doing any of these kind of things, anything financial, and it's understandable, right? This is what they do. But years ago, to your point, we had like agricultural banks, we had manufacturers banks, we had overseas banks, right? So you knew clearly what these banks, people's banks, right? You know clearly kind of what they do, right? So now today, it's hard to delineate these things. It's hard to tell the difference. So I don't know, for myself, I mean, I think if I was going to open a new bank account today, I really would look less at the name and more at who's more convenient for me, who's closer to my home. If you're within 5 miles, yeah, I'm thinking about you as a bank. And that's kind of even old thinking, okay? Because what I'm thinking about is a bricks and mortar, a physical bank, right? But today, as you mentioned earlier, the younger generation is looking at things a lot differently. I think a lot of them have never been physically inside a bank. And look, nothing wrong with that. Today, you don't need to. You can do it all on your phone, and they do. So it's great. But I want to throw you just a couple of curves when we start talking about banks' names and everything else. Right now, I'll give you 2. Bank of the West and First Hawaiian.
Yeah.
Okay? So what do those 2 banks have in common? Well, obviously, First Hawaiian is a bank that started in Hawaii, right? Bank of the West kind of gives you the idea it's a bank that's on the West Coast, right?
Mhm.
Well, what's interesting, and this is kind of where I want to toss it over to, when we talk about branding and everything, what those two banks have in common is who owns them.
Mm.
And who owns them is the biggest French bank, BNP Paribas. Okay? Now, BNP Paribas has their own operations, particularly in New York, that are branded BNP Paribas. But Greg, when they went out and purchased years ago Bank of the West, and when they went out years ago and purchased First Hawaiian, and I will tell you, there's 3 or 4 other banks, why didn't they become BNP Paribas?
Mm. Well, good question. I think a lot of that because where they're regionally located. And to your earlier point in this conversation when we first started, if you change the name, would it change the perception for the people that are actually using the bank? Like, if people are used to that, Bank of the West, I remember Bank of the West, right? So if you start changing it to the parent name, people are like, well, what is that? And then you're introducing uncertainty into that situation that really may not need to be there unless you're radically changing the experience that you're about to go through. Or let's just say the Bank of the West became insolvent or had a bad reputation. It's like the reputation is terrible. Maybe that's just why they were able to be purchased. And so, what, we're going to put a different name on this because so people know there's different owners. It's not the same. So there's different reasons why you would either change the name or keep your name because of brand reputation, right? What does that brand say for the people, 80% of the people that are using it? So you just leave it alone. You don't have to worry about that. Especially then to your point that bigger bank is buying people in other parts of the country, let's just say, and maybe that's the same way in that particular case. It's the same thing. You don't need to know who actually owns. You see this in the media world all the time. We're not going to change the name because then people will think it's something you're going to get a differentiated experience. And if it's going to be really the same thing, there's really no reason to do that. But if you do your due diligence and you're doing a M&A work or something on the back end, people want to know who the true owners are. That's a different thing. So it's not public facing; it's more private.
Well, Graham, you brought up a real interesting thing, which I think sums a lot of his reputation has so much to do with it. And what people don't understand, I think, in the banking world is CEOs, right? What keeps a bank CEO awake at night? Well, the answer is really simple: nothing. Okay. If things go terribly wrong, they get a golden parachute, a big chunk of money in stock, and they leave, right? And most of them, they're 40 years into their career, so I'm retiring a couple of years earlier. That's if something goes wrong, right? But the one thing that they care about, the most important thing really to them, is reputational risk. Mm-hmm. Because banks in particular are so based on trust. I trust my bank. That's why I put my money there. If you have something that shakes that trust, that is what keeps the CEO awake at night. Now, it's interesting, a lot of friends that I have in the banking world who are at that next level, they say, what, nothing keeps the CEO awake. Those problems keep us awake. If I'm an EVP and SVP, I'm the one who's staying and has to be awake for these kind of things. And then just to come back to the BNP Paribas owning Bank of the West, owning First Hawaiian, we have a number of Canadian banks that have bought U.S. banks and kept the brand name that was existing in place. We have other foreign banks that have come and done the same thing. And to me, the common thread is would Americans readily accept a bank that is bought and name is changed to a foreign bank?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And with your expertise, how, if that question came to you from a client, how would you kind of react to that? How would you kind of guide them to that? Is there a benefit to that, or is keeping it all American per se a strength?
Well, you just said it. Perception is king. reputation is king. And something when you're in a commodity world for the most part, and that's what I'm saying, most checking, savings, credit card, CDs, as you said, deregulation, everybody has that. Why are you going to do business with you? It's usually reputation. And there is some kind of emotional connection to that particular institution for whatever reason. So you don't want to change that as much. And unless there's a greater reputation out there, like let's look at the car industry. For many years, Japanese cars were looked upon as inferior. And then over time, as they went back to their toolbox and came out with a much better vehicle, and let's say the Toyota Camry, Honda Accord, and they began to own that small sedan world without question. They owned it. So then it became good to say, oh yeah, I have a nice Toyota. That means you got stability, you got quality. People like it. Same thing in the German car manufacturing world, right? So where in the world is banking known? What is the big brand of banking on a worldwide level, right? And you start looking at it, because if you have a good brand in, I'd say, in the financial banking world that's well known, and you might be great, but if it's not well known, you're not doing yourself any good service for the people that are utilizing those services, right? So brand recognition is huge. It's really, really big. And where that sits today is so important for people. And it goes back because money is something that people get nervous about, right? It will keep you up at night. You start looking at, just like now, what are we talking about? Stocks and bonds. Everybody wakes up like, how come there's so much red on my ticker tapes these days? It wasn't then, because I'm thinking about it, when they look at their portfolio. You know what? I used to have a certain zero there. Is that zero missing? Is there a mistake right there? And then you start wanting to start asking questions like, well, how is this bank banked? Like, who's banking the bank, right? Because this now is becoming a thing. So if you start to find out, oh my God, this bank is owned by a foreign entity, this becomes now something I'm concerned about, because I can't just jump on a plane and fly over there that quickly, to pull my money out or whatever that may be. Hopefully that's not the case. So you need a certain degree of trust, as you said. Maybe that's what Truist is all about, right? It's all about trust. So maybe there is some brand recognition, and you can trust me with your money. So we got into the Caribbean markets. That's one of the biggest reasons, and we're going to talk about this when we come back. This is one of the biggest reasons why in the U.S. Virgin Islands and St. Croix that we're building out a financial center, because of the American banking system, the stability of the American banking system in the Caribbean, in the CARICOM region, gives a certain amount of name recognition, trust, backing that, hey, if I put $1 million in this bank, I'm pretty sure tomorrow that $1 million is still going to be there. And there is no volatility with that, right? So we're going to talk about that, because I see Chris is like, I can't wait to jump in on this. So we're going to jump on this, and we're going to let Chris kind of weigh in on what's going on in the USVI, why are we doing this, and the reputation that's going to be garnered from what we're talking about. So we'll be right back.
5-Star BDM, Brand Development Masters, is a professional consulting and advisory group keenly focused on business development services for the small to mid-sized business and entrepreneurs. Although every business is unique, they often share business development challenges that can be addressed through smart branding. Services include process improvement and operations, digital strategy and transformation, business intelligence, digital marketing, and personal branding. Our business and personal branding company has helped a number of professionals and organizations to optimize and grow. This results in more business, more opportunities, better reach, positive outcomes. Visit www.5starbdm.com today to learn more.
Follow the Brand TV broadcast host, Grant McGaw, as he visits with top executives and entrepreneurs to find out their secrets of success with their personal brand. Follow the Brand TV broadcast host as he focuses on brand development to build better relationships, bring value to your business, relationships, and career. You will enjoy listening to each episode that is tailored to speak to you directly. If you're looking for this type of clarity in terms of building your brand, you have tuned into the right station. Each episode will help you to shape a conversation in the 5-Star BDM network of 20,000 professionals and become a springboard for your corporate engagement and business opportunities. Each guest will frame their story in the areas of personal branding, business development, career development, financial empowerment, and technology innovation. Grant McGaw explains why he is the CEO and owner of his own professional career. Grant is an accomplished business leader and entrepreneur who wants to give back to individuals to grow their personal brand strategy. Tune in as he weaves his story about new possibilities, while to you exceed expectations. If you love storytelling, this show will make for fun.
And we are back. So, Chris, you've been waiting all this time. I know you got something on your mind.
Well, Grant, just a couple of quick things I want to touch on to some of the things. You know, when we talk about foreign banks buying U.S. banks and the idea that, you know, people are going to be more comfortable with the U.S. name and not think that, well, I'm putting my money into a foreign bank, right? And another good example here in the U.S. is TD Bank. A lot of people, now they're a bank who was bought U.S. banks and changed their branding to their own, TD Bank.
Yeah.
It's interesting, though, because there's probably few people, if you ask them, what does TD stand for? How many people would really know that, right?
I don't.
It stands for Toronto Dominion Bank.
Wow.
Yeah.
I would have lost that on Jeopardy.
Well, I would have won that one. Anyway, but the point is that they've changed to the foreign bank name. It's Canadian Bank, clearly, but people don't recognize it as such. And they've done the advertising and the branding around it to be able to let people know that it's not. Now, we've seen another interesting thing in banking over the last 10 to 20 years, right? This is where foreign banks come here. They keep their brand name, but they specifically target their communities,
Yeah.
right? So, for instance, if you go out to Los Angeles, where you have a large Asian population, right? Outside of Los Angeles is Koreatown, right next to this little Saigon. Now, you just take a drive through any one of those areas, and you will see Vietnamese banks using their Vietnamese name. In fact, with Vietnamese underneath. Same with Korean banks, same with Chinese banks. Okay, the whole branding thing, they're not really looking for the typical American, right? They're looking for people that have come over here and settled here, have family here, whatever, and have that connection back to the homeland. So it's kind of interesting that we're now seeing both kinds of branding, right? Foreign banks that keep the U.S. banks so they don't appear foreign, and foreign banks that come over that keep their name because they definitely want to appear foreign.
True. You know, it's all about your audience.
What other markets does that happen, Grant? Because I can't really think too clearly about one, you know?
Well, branding, marketing, they all follow a certain line, and that's audience. who is your audience? Who's your ideal customer? Who banks with you? In other words, you want to appeal to them. You know, if you're an American, you don't want to walk into a bank, let's say in your neighborhood, and everything is in Japanese. You'd be like, oh, you know, I don't understand it. Now you get a certain red flag of uncertainty that just pops up, you know, because you're just not sure what happens. You know, just like right now, would you want to bank in a Ukrainian bank? It's like, this is a Ukrainian bank. Like, what? Be a little risky because they got stuff going on.
That trust factor, right? That trust factor again. That's key in banking. Maybe not in other areas, right? But certainly in banking.
All of these things are important. So what we talked about was that in the USVI, United States Virgin Islands, which is a territory of the United States, new legislation has been passed, memorandums of understanding for the first time, even though the U.S. Virgin Islands has been in the Caribbean for a very long time. They have not always been able to participate in what I call like the League of Nations, right? That is the CARICOM.
Yeah.
No, they didn't have a seat, right? But now they do. Talk to us about now what the perception will be that you have an American banking entity operating in the Caribbean.
Well, great. Just one thing before I tell you that is I got a little curveball for you.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk a little bit about the Caribbean, but don't let me not give you this curveball before we go off the air, please.
Yeah. Yep. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. So when we talk about the Caribbean, look, the big issue started years ago. It's what we call de-risking. And it's where not only the big U.S. banks, or all the U.S. banks basically pulled out, but all the foreign banks also pulled out, right? And de-risking is really simple. I call it the banks thinking of one bad transaction, right? So if I'm in Grenada and I have one bad transaction, whether it's money laundering, terrorists, drugs, whatever, one bad transaction, the fine that I can get from the U.S. banking system will probably wipe out all the profit I made the last 10 years because it's a small market. So the banks who are really not in the business of money, they're in the business of managing risk. When they look at that, they say, well, there's too big a risk for the benefit based on what could happen. For me to be there, I pull out. Okay.
Yeah.
So now you have the banking in the Caribbean, which is basically local banks, and Scotiabank, which is, a big Canadian bank. They're like the main ones in there. So the problem is when you're not connected to the bigger banking system, it's very difficult then to take your local currency, Jamaican dollar, let's say, and convert it to US dollars or convert it to euros or convert it to British pounds. So that becomes the big thing. So when we start talking about reviving the banking system in the Caribbean, that connection is the most key thing. The way to get that connection is by having an entity that is present in the US, that does have that US connection, that credibility, that trust that we've been talking about, and have that bank being the connect-all for the Caribbean. And that's the steady case proposition. And it's a really good one, because this is what will allow businesses and people to be able to grow faster, to be able to be connected to the rest of the world. And at the same time, and the Ketty says the SETI case initiative addresses it, is to be more interconnected in the Caribbean itself, right? Because right now there isn't let's say the legal framework for how people can move from country to country. These are all island nations. The movement is important. More importantly, how do we move goods and products between the countries? And that is a roadblock today, because there isn't that system in place to be able to make it. And then what you need for that is, once you start having, say, shipping that connects those things, is those people that are both buying and selling need financing.
Yeah.
So again, you pull in a bank that is has U.S. roots. It's situated in the U.S. Virgin Islands under U.S. banking laws, and now you have the confidence to do these kind of things. And to me, this is is revolutionary for what can go on within the regions. Now, if I go back into history, the Caribbean islands actually did very well years and years ago. 17th century, 18th century. Yes, the countries they were colonies. Okay, so but the shipping, and that's what I want to talk about, not the colony, but the shipping that went on was integrated throughout all the islands because there was multiple ships, it was inexpensive, and there were products that benefited all the islands and they circulated. Mm-hmm. We need to get back to that.
Yes. No,
okay.
And before I leave, you got it's baseball season, everybody knows. So curveballs are in. What curveball you got for me?
Okay, so one of my favorite banks name, right? And I want to get a minute or two of your opinion on this, but it's a bank out of South Dakota. Okay, South Dakota, okay. not the state that everyone has on their list to visit, right? Oh no, I'm not going to Las Vegas. I want to go to South Dakota. Doesn't happen, right? But if you're in South Dakota, would you bank with a bank with the name? And this is real. I'm not making this up.
Yeah.
The name of the bank is First Sleepy Eye Bank.
First Sleepy Eye Bank, right?
So Greg, with your knowledge on branding and everything, how does that happen?
Well, again, that's got to be a local thing. It's got to be a local thing. So if where that location is in South Dakota, and I am in the Midwest right now in Nebraska, so I can appreciate that. Most of the time, especially in the Midwest, you're going to have banking institutions, things of that nature that are just colloquial, to that region. You might not only see Sleepy Eyed Bank, let's say, but you might see Sleepy Eyed Motel. You might see Sleepy Eyed Restaurant.
Let me stop for a second, okay? Now, if I see Sleepy Eye Hotel, I think to myself, I can get a good night's rest there.
Right.
So I will go, right? But if I see First Sleepy Eye Bank, do I want my bank to be sleepy-eyed? I mean, is my money secure?
It's not even, so you're on the wrong perception of what that means, because it's like, no, that whole town is sleepy, okay? That's just what it is, Now, if you start seeing sleepy and they really grew, let's just say they struck oil, and all of a sudden you saw sleepy now in Denver or some big marketplace that doesn't have the emotional connection. Here's the deal with branding. It has to evoke some kind of emotional connection. If it's not immediate to you, it's not a great brand. Going back to what I said about when I said the Golden Arches, I didn't even say the name of the company. You already
still haven't said it. You still haven't said the name.
So when you say Sleepy Eye, like, yeah, but you start looking at it like it's a sleepy bank. No, but if you're in the community where people understand that there's an emotional connection to it, it makes perfect sense. And if you start running around your community, you really start looking around and look at the names of some of these businesses, even outside the banks, you'd be like, how the heck did that happen? But there's a story behind it, and the locals kind of know what it is, and that kind of, so I think that's about local branding as opposed to regional and national and international branding, and there is a difference.
Well,
we've got about 30 seconds here.
Grant, I'm just going to finish up. You're the brand master. I have so much respect for the amount of knowledge you have in that space. And I think you really gave everyone a real insight. I mean, I came up with some of the banking names and everything, but you had the insight. And what I really liked is the connection between their markets and their name and their brand.
Exactly. And it makes sense for them in that market. Perfect sense. Outside the market, it might get a little dicey, but that's when you get into mergers, acquisitions, somebody buys it. To your point earlier, why would a big bank, international bank, not, change the name? There's all those kind of reasons. So we're going to talk about more next week when we come back on the big picture. I want to thank you again for being on the show.
So Grant, one thing real quick. Who would win if Wells Fargo and Bank of America merged? Would it be Wells America, or would it be?
Oh no, I think the people would win, but the banks would lose.
Well, I like that. That's okay. Bye, Grant.